Hello again everybody and welcome to Test Flight in the Gazelle. Now this is the new module just released by Polychop Simulations, and this version depicts the SA342 Gazelle. It's a French light attack and reconnaissance helicopter, and this being the 342M variant, it specializes in the anti-tank role. Now this helicopter in general has been in service since the early 70s and continues to serve with a number of users, notably the French and British Army. It's seen use in combat by several nations. The Syrians used it in 1982 during operations in Lebanon. The French, British, the Kuwaitis, and I believe several others used the aircraft in Operation Desert Storm in 1991. So those are just a few examples of the use this aircraft has seen. And like I said, this being the SA342M variant is going to specialize in the anti-tank role using the Hot 3 missile. It's a wire-guided tube-launched missile. You can see examples out there slung on the left and right side of the fuselage on this aircraft. And then to direct the weapons, we use the APX-397 sighting camera that you can see mounted on the top of the aircraft, right above us in fact, if we look up there. And you can also see the controls at the left-hand flight station in the cockpit itself, and my understanding at least is that additional sub-variants and weapons choices are planned for the future. So what I'm going to do here is go through my normal process for learning an aircraft from scratch. Starting right here, I've taken the aircraft up for a few minutes. I think I've been flying maybe 10-15 minutes at this point, just to map controls, get my axes mapped to the proper functions. I've had my collective right here that I have mapped to my throttle so that I can just slide it back and forth. Of course, I have the cyclic and the pedals mapped to the corresponding controls. And then from there, just look at the handling characteristics of the aircraft so that once I do get to the point where I can get here on my own, going through the startup and working with the systems, I'll know what to expect and I'll know what a normal situation feels like, so I can spot things that I didn't set up correctly or that just don't feel right as I go and when I get to that point. So the first thing that I notice here, just flying the aircraft around, it's extremely light on the controls, so you have to use really smooth and really well thought out control inputs. You can't yank and bank the thing around like you can on the CAW-50 or even the Huey under certain circumstances, and it's extremely stable in forward flight once you get it past the hover and past the transitional lift. I have been just completely neutral on the rudder ever since I got up above about 60 knots or so, once the airflow gets to the point where aerodynamic forces start to kick in. Now when I start to get into a hover and I'll put the nose up and reduce the collective a little bit, the tendency is once the speed gets down below the transitional lift point, I'll see if I can get it to go here. Yeah, there it goes. The nose tends to go left and I just correct with a little bit of right pedal. And mentioning the sensitivity of the controls, especially the pedal, you just have to use a very light touch and not overcorrect and over-control. So yeah, once you get that down, it's extremely easy and extremely maneuverable and enjoyable to fly. So let me go ahead and bring it back over here. And I've actually read it's at this point been out for about a day, and I've been reading a lot of people talking about how to set up the controls, about different types of curves and how to, mess with controls. I've done absolutely nothing to my controls. I have a Warthog HOTAS, and it's just standard, no extensions, no nothing. And I would just recommend, before you start going in and doing anything crazy to your controls as far as assigning curves and just messing with the setup, give it a little while. Even after 15 minutes, I can tell that I'm going to have a little bit of a learning curve here, but I don't think it's that unreasonable given a little bit of time. I'm having no trouble at all, contrary to what I've been reading from other sources. So yeah, just give it time, and if a real Gazelle pilot told me that it flew exactly like it did right here, I would believe them. But then again, if a real Gazelle pilot told me that there are some differences, well, I could see that too, but that could just be dependent on your control, and maybe I'm just lucky that I have a Warthog and I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And additionally, as far as reference materials that I'm going to be using throughout the series, it's a little bit sparser than usual when it comes to information on this model of the Gazelle. I have some real-world manuals for some British variants and civilian variants of the Gazelle, some of which are going to apply when it comes to procedures, some of which are not, especially when it comes to the navigation system, some of the radios, and of course the targeting system and weapons employment. So I'll be working those in wherever I can. And of course, I'm going to have the manual itself available on the Kneeboard and available just alt-tabbing out to it as we go as well. So I do have some, I guess, additional information that I've been able to scrounge up, and we'll see that once we get going. But I'll start out with just a sweep around the cockpit, and let me sort of establish just sort of going forward. And the trim system, I should note that we have a magnetic brake, and it's just sort of a trim button that works, as far as the system goes, very, very similarly to the trim system in the COV50 or the Huey or any helicopter, the HIP or any helicopter in DCS. But that system is not recommended for non-force feedback systems, and that's what it says in the manual, so I'm not really using that extensively. But there is a trim system that I can manipulate using it's called the China hat on this stick. It's basically just your normal trim control that I would use for a fixed-wing aircraft. So I can manipulate the trim. For example, I'm just going to trim a little bit nose down right here, and it's very, very subtle, but you can see the nose coming down and the airspeed starting to increase. If I trim nose up, yeah, that's a little bit more evident right there. Then the nose comes up, speed comes down, but I start to climb. So I do have that technique to manipulate the trim. And, you know, just another comment on the handling, and it takes such a light force on the stick to make these changes, and I'm not really finding that I'm getting myself into a position like I would in the Huey, where I would have just an extreme force on the stick, you know, having it deflected, you know, more than just a couple of inches in any direction, and getting into a point where I would want or need to do the magnetic trim hold right there, just to hold the stick in that position. I'm finding that it's very, very usable and very, very convenient, in fact, to just use the trim hat and just trim the helicopter as if it were a fixed-wing aircraft. So let me just start to go around the cockpit here, and it's so easy to get this thing into just a well-trimmed forward flight. As long as you keep airspeed on the aircraft, I'm absolutely hands-off at this point. So let's start with the main console right here. And there's really not a whole lot to this. We have some controls up top, some controls on the left side for the weapon system, but mainly everything is just sort of right here on the center pedestal and the main display console. So I'll just start at the upper left. We have the radar warning receiver that I have turned off. I'll go ahead and turn it on and get it warming up. Main caution and warning panel, then our primary flight instruments. So vertical velocity indicator, and you can see that I'm in just a slight climb. ADI, so I have the nose slightly pointed down right now, and just the little ball right there telling me that I have a little bit of side slip going. I'll take that out with a little bit of right pedal. Actually, no, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just going to leave all controls neutral at this point. I have my airspeed indicator giving me my airspeed in kilometers per hour, and then I have an engine torque instrument right here that I also have a little bug right here that I can set to a max torque limit based on the current altitude and temperature. I think this is actually the chart that you would use to set that little bug right up here. So I'll get into that once we get into managing the systems. Let me plug in a little bit of more collective to put myself into a climb up above this terrain. Okay, so coming around, then I have, let me see, these are navigation communications controls. Oh, that's, let me see, main artificial horizon selector. I was deceived by some of the labels there, but that's going to put it into different modes. And let me see, then we have some electrical, we have some, not sure exactly what that one is, I'll get back on that one. Temperature right there, and then some additional electrical controls down below that. We have navigation instruments right here, and I'll put in a little bit more collective as we get up above this little hill. You see I have a radar altimeter, so I can see it dropping down quite rapidly to my little bug at 50 meters. I'll put in a lot more collective to get up above this hill. Altimeter right here, altitude in meters. And let's see, standby ADI and lighting controls. Okay, gyro, this is associated with the navigation system, and then some additional controls. I think these are associated with the autopilot and some tests we can run. Okay, down on the collective a little bit to keep us coming over. Okay, coming down here we have some, let me see, UHF. These are some communications controls. And then to the right of that we have, let me see, engine starting controls, a clock, and then an engine torque and engine RPM meter right there. Or, no, I'm sorry, that's all RPM. That's just engine RPM and rotor RPM displayed for us right there. And then coming down to autopilot controls, which I think I have disengaged right now, but then again, I might actually have some sort of assist going right now, considering how easy it is for me to fly the aircraft at this point. I'm completely hands-off, like I said. Okay, navigation control. This is going to be very interesting because we have an onboard navigation system, and I can put it into different modes to display different things. I can select the different steer points or waypoints that I have created using this. That'll be interesting to get into. It actually has its own manual. Then communications controls for a VHF radio. We have an FM radio right here. Navigation controls using an ADF system. And then, I'm not sure exactly what this is. Okay, that's for my flare. It says flare power and speed. Okay, so these are countermeasure controls, apparently. Then to my collective, my stick, and I have some functions already mapped there. And then back here we have IFF controls, which I'm not going to worry about since it's not really modeled. Now, coming up top, I have additional lighting controls, and then big levers for controlling fuel flow, and the rotor brake, and just some other features. I think this is actually a fuel shutoff lever right here that's not modeled and doesn't really do anything for us. And that is really about all there is to it. And I went into a lot more detail there than I would normally do because, I mean, everything is right there. So let's go ahead and step over to the left-hand station, and that's just keyboard command. It's 1 to get to the right side, 2 to get to the left side. So now we have a look around from this position, and then we have the TV or IR image display right here that's associated with the camera system. It's mounted up there just forward of the rotor. We have the control stick right here that I'll be able to use to manipulate I think this will be able to fire the laser from here and to release weapons using this and this button. I have 2 switches right there that don't seem to be implemented, but coming down here I have additional controls for the display that I'll be using, and then controls for weapons arming and selection down here below the display. And then I also have on this side flight controls. So you could, if desired, fly it from this side. So up next, I'm going to go to the menu and see what kind of options we have for special options specific to the aircraft, missions and campaigns, keeping in mind that I'm only flying this in DCS 2.0 right now. It's going to be probably another week or so, depending on when you're watching this, before it's available in the release version of DCS World, and I believe a campaign will be included at that point. And a lot of this stuff, I should point out, is still work in progress, so everything that you see here is not going to, I guarantee, represent the final version of the aircraft when it comes to system functionality, missions, campaigns, options that are included. But before I go, it's so fun to fly this aircraft. It's just such a different experience from the Huey and the other stuff. I've just been flying it around. I guess another note right here, since I don't know when I'm going to get back to talking about the handling characteristics, is that if you over-control the aircraft, it's easy to get yourself into what's known as a PIO, pilot-induced oscillations, where you just have the aircraft doing its own thing, and you're trying to correct it, trying to fight the aircraft, but it's just going to exacerbate the situation. So if you find yourself in that situation due to over-controlling, I think a good example is, if I do something like that, you know, the best thing to do, I find, is just to release the controls, allow it to damp out, and then once it damps to the point where you've got a controllable situation, then take over. I think the worst thing you could do in those cases, and I'll try to get myself into another one here, just doing pitch oscillations. If you get yourself into that case, release controls, let it damp out, and I find that, you know, just 1 or 2 cycles, and it's going to damp to the point where you can then start to make controls, and it's going to start to respond in a way that you would consider normal to the control inputs you make. Especially important considering the light control forces that are associated with this aircraft. Very different from the Huey and the others in the way that it reacts to those situations. Now, let me do some more stuff at low speed real quick, so I'll be right back. It's so much fun. Okay, so right now I'm just sort of practicing putting the aircraft into a hover, and I find that, and I don't know, maybe I would think this is the way that it would be done in a real helicopter. You wouldn't do this at ground level if you're just learning it. You would do it up high. So I have gone through transitional lift. I have a little bit of right pedal plugged in, and I'm just sort of watching the vertical velocity indicator. Okay, there we go. Now I think I can plug in a little bit more collective, a little bit more right pedal. And yeah, now I'm establishing a hover. Actually, I'm a little bit of a climb. So yeah, I think the trick here is I'm going to have to practice at high altitude. And that's sort of something I learned when going through the process of learning the Huey, is that you don't want to try all this stuff down low. Because if I had got too much of a sync rate going and got into like a vortex ring state where you have too much sink rate and that the blades stall, I would rather do that up here at, 3 or 4 or whatever, 5,000 feet. Actually, I don't even think I'm that high. I would rather make these mistakes up here. So there's transitional lift, there's right pedal to compensate, and there we go. Got some more sink rate going. I've got it arrested, and I think I do have a little bit of forward velocity going now, and yeah, it just enters a hover like that. So practicing up high like I am right now, I think is the way to do it, and that's going to include, yeah, as you can see there, that's going to include transitioning to forward flight. I'm definitely not going to try that on the ground because it did get away from me there just slightly as I was transitioning. So I'm just, as I'm flying it around in general, focusing on very, very light controls, very, very smooth controls. If the aircraft does something I don't expect it to do, I don't try to fight it, I just let it damp out and then just smoothly control the aircraft from there. So I've read a lot of people just having all kinds of trouble with this, and well, for my part, I am having a lot of fun with this. So, okay, let me go ahead and put this away for now. I'll go to the menu, we'll go over what we have there, and then we'll get into starting to get into the system, starting with an aircraft startup, transitioning to the hover, forward flight, doing some systems checks as we go on the engine and other systems, navigating with the aircraft, employing weapons, everything that we need to do. So I'll be right back. Now, having a look at the main menu and keeping in mind, of course, this is DCS 2.0, I'll revisit this to see what else is here once the release version gets the aircraft. But if I come to the options and the special tab for the Gazelle and I'm looking for SA342, I can see that I have an easier controls option right there, that if you are having trouble controlling the aircraft, that's definitely an option. I'm going to leave it off for my purposes. I have waypoints preloaded. Now, the navigation system is, I believe, not going to have any kind of like a cartridge you could bring out to the aircraft for, like, say for example in the A10 where all that data is preloaded. I believe that to make this 100% realistic, this would need to be off, and then you would take the time once the aircraft is started up to enter your initial position and then enter your waypoints. I could be wrong on that. I'll revisit that as we go, but for now I'm going to leave it checked. And then controls display, and I might use this. I don't really like using that little box we get that shows where your cyclic, collective, and pedals are, but if I get into like a more detailed discussion of what I'm doing to make the aircraft do what I want it to do, I might bring that up, and if I do, it's going to display on the left bottom corner. And then under customized cockpits, now the cockpit of the Gazelle is in French, so there is the potential, I suppose, for English language or other language cockpits to materialize. If and when they do, this is where you would go to select them. So that's it for the special tab. Now if I come up here to instant action missions, again, this is only for Nevada, but we have a cold start, we have a ground attack mission against static trucks, and then we have an improve your piloting skill mission, which sounds right up my alley no matter what aircraft we're dealing with, but those options are there. And in 2.0 at least, there are no missions or campaigns. However, under training, we have 4 missions. We have a cold start, a weapons employment, Nadir, PP, and BUT. These are different modes of the navigation system. And actually, on my own time, this is going to be the first thing that I do, is use the built-in training missions to learn as much as I can. I'm not going to show these here because these are things that if you're trying to learn the aircraft on your own, you could just go through and do, but I am going to run through these before I go on my own and start to get into the, for example, the cold start. So folks, what I'm going to do is wrap this video up here. I'm going to go fly those training missions and then come back and start to get into detail, looking at the real-world manuals, looking at the documentation included with this Gazelle, because my entire point here is to not just be able to perform the procedures step by step, is to really understand what I'm doing and what each step in the process of the cold start, the weapons deployment, managing the engine, understanding what is happening to the aircraft when I flip the individual switches, understanding the systems, and not just performing the procedures by rote. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to follow along, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and you can help me out by leaving a like, sharing this video, or any others I do anywhere that you would want to. I'll be back very soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.